The late afternoon sun filtered gently through the canopy of oak trees, casting a golden hue over the garden of the historic Bellevue estate in a quiet Virginia town. Rows of white wooden chairs lined the cobblestone aisle, adorned with soft pastel ribbons that fluttered with the summer breeze. Laughter rippled through the air, mingling with the gentle notes of a string quartet playing near the arch where vows would soon be exchanged. It was by all accounts the perfect wedding setting. Guests arrived dressed in shades of celebration, light blues, soft pinks, elegant creams. They greeted one another with warm hugs and cheerful toasts. Cameras clicked, champagne flowed, and the atmosphere brimmed with joy and anticipation. At the center of it all stood Ethan Miller, the groom, his hair neatly styled, his dark blue suit tailored to precision. He shifted his weight from one polished shoe to the other, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the aisle with a tense smile. He was trying his best to stay calm, but something tugged at his attention. Ethan had always been a man of composure, logical, dependable, steady as a mountain. Yet, as the guests continued to settle, his gaze kept drifting to the back row of chairs, where an elderly woman sat alone. Her presence was out of place, not because she didn't belong, but because no one else seemed to acknowledge her. She wore a pale gray dress, modest and neatly pressed, with her white hair pulled into a bun. Her hands trembled slightly as they clutched a small, well-worn handbag on her lap. But what caught Ethan's attention most wasn't her stillness. It was the tears. She wept silently. Not the kind of tears people cry out of joy at weddings, but something deeper, something restrained and sorrowful, the kind of grief that lived in the bones. No one seemed to notice her. Not a single guest turned to ask if she was all right. She was an island in a sea of celebration. Ethan's brows furrowed. He leaned slightly toward his best man, Caleb, and asked in a low voice, "Do you know who she is? The woman sitting alone back there?" Caleb followed his gaze and shrugged. Never seen her before. Maybe a distant relative? You know how weddings bring out the family tree. But Ethan wasn't convinced. There was something hauntingly familiar about the woman's face. Something he couldn't place. A shadow of a memory. Perhaps her posture, the way she dabbed at her eyes with the edge of a handkerchief, stirred something deep within him. An emotion he didn't expect to feel on his wedding day. Unease. A hush fell over the crowd as the music shifted. The moment had arrived. The officiant took his place under the arch, and guests turned expectantly toward the entrance. The bridesmaids began their procession, each step measured, each smile practiced. Then came Sophie, dressed in ivory lace. Sophie Carter looked radiant. Her presence lit up the garden more vividly than the setting sun. Her smile was effortless, her eyes locked with Ethan's as she moved gracefully toward him. The guests sighed in admiration. Even Ethan found himself smiling back, momentarily pulled away from the disturbance he felt. They joined hands at the altar, exchanging a brief whisper and a quiet chuckle. For a moment, the world felt right. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking of love, unity, and the courage it took to build a life together. The guests listened with soft eyes and tilted heads, hanging onto each word like a hymn. But Ethan couldn't stop glancing toward the back. The woman was still crying. Not louder, not seeking attention, but she had not moved. Her shoulders rose and fell with every breath, every quiet sob, as if she were watching something no one else could see. And suddenly, something within Ethan shifted. A face, a corridor, a dimly lit room, a woman's hand holding his, whispering words of comfort when he was no more than a child. His heart began to pound, but he didn't understand why. "Do you, Ethan, take Sophie to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he replied, barely above a whisper. Applause followed, and the kiss that sealed it all drew cheers from the crowd. The officiant introduced them as husband and wife, and the couple walked hand in hand down the aisle, beaming at friends and family. Confetti rained from above as laughter returned in full. But Ethan's mind wasn't celebrating. As they reached the end of the aisle, he paused. For a split second, he turned his head toward the back row. The woman hadn't moved. She hadn't clapped. She hadn't smiled. Their eyes met. It was only a moment, but in that gaze, Ethan felt something ancient and aching, as if 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. He leaned into Sophie's ear. "I need a moment." She looked at him, confused but trusting. He squeezed her hand and turned around. The guests watched in surprise as the groom walked away from the crowd, back down the aisle against the tide of celebration, toward the woman sitting alone. When he reached her, she looked up slowly, her eyes red and tired. Ethan knelt beside her, without saying a word. The world around them blurred, the music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, all of it distant. He leaned close and whispered something into her ear. And suddenly, Margaret froze. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. A tremble ran through her entire body as she stared at him. For the first time since she had arrived, she spoke. "You remember me?" Ethan's expression was unreadable. And in that moment, under the twinkling lights and falling petals, the wedding changed. Not just for Ethan and Sophie, but for every soul present. Something long buried was beginning to surface. Something that would reshape the meaning of the celebration entirely. The reception had barely begun when a subtle tension settled over the celebration like an unseen mist. The music played. The waitstaff carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, and guests murmured in small clusters. But many kept glancing toward the far side of the garden where Ethan had gone. His absence had not gone unnoticed, especially after the unusual gesture walking away from his bride just moments after saying, "I do." Sophie stood near the refreshments table, her hands gently gripping the edge of the white linen cloth as she scanned the garden for any sign of him. She tried to appear composed, nodding politely at well-wishers, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Ethan remained beside the old woman, his posture slightly slouched as if he had been carrying a weight he didn't know was his until this very moment. Margaret sat still, her hand now resting on his. The chaos of the reception was a distant hum. She looked into his eyes as if trying to memorize the face she hadn't seen in decades. Her voice trembled as she broke the silence again. "You were only 4 years old the last time I saw you. You had a favorite blue blanket and a habit of hiding behind doors when you didn't want to say goodbye." Ethan blinked slowly. "I don't remember that. Not clearly. But I remember someone sitting at the end of my bed, holding my hand. I thought I made it up. I thought I imagined her." Margaret smiled, but was a small, exhausted smile, touched more by sorrow than joy. "That was me. I visited the orphanage once. Just once. I wasn't allowed to return." A cold, heavy quiet settled between them. Ethan looked down at her frail fingers intertwined with his own knuckles pale from the pressure of memories surfacing. Bits and pieces, flashes of a childhood buried under layers of normalcy built by his adoptive parents. Kind people, generous and good, but whose stories began after that orphanage door closed behind him. Until now. He had never tried to look past it. He had always assumed it was better that way. He lifted his eyes again. "Why now? Why today?" "I never stopped looking," Margaret whispered. "My daughter, your mother, was only 16 when she had you. My husband was ashamed. He said we needed to forget everything. He forced her to give you up, and when I tried to fight it, he threatened to leave. I was weak. I should have left him instead. But I didn't. I let fear win." Her voice cracked. "When he died, I started searching again. It took years to even find the orphanage. But by then, you'd already been adopted. No names, no addresses. Nothing but a paper trail that led to a dead end." Ethan listened, stunned by the pieces falling into place. "How did you find me now?" Margaret reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. It was from a local paper, dated just a few weeks prior. Your engagement announcement. You were standing beside Sophie. I stared at that picture for hours. Then I called the venue and pretended to be a distant aunt. I just needed to see you, even if from afar. His heart ached with something he couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even confusion anymore. It was a gnawing grief for all the years lost, birthdays missed, stories never told, the quiet spaces in his life that could have been filled by this woman's laughter, her wisdom, her love. He couldn't understand how such a bond, severed by shame and silence, could still feel so alive. Behind them, The clinking of glasses and a burst of laughter reminded him of where he was, what today was supposed to be. He turned to look over his shoulder, spotting Sophie still standing by the table, her face taut with concern. "I need to tell her," he said softly. Margaret nodded, her voice low. "She seems kind." "She is," he replied. Ethan walked back toward the reception, his steps steady but heavy, weaving through the crowd without pausing for conversation. Guests parted as he passed, some offering curious glances, others whispering behind their champagne flutes. He reached Sophie and took her gently by the hand, guiding her away from the crowd. They walked toward the side of the estate, near the rose garden, where only the buzzing of bees and the rustle of leaves filled the air. Sophie didn't speak at first. Waiting, Ethan ran a hand through his hair and turned to face her fully. "There's something I didn't expect to happen today," he began, voice low and careful. "The woman at the back. She's not just a guest. Her name is Margaret. She's my grandmother." Sophie's brows knit. "Your grandmother? But I thought I was adopted when I was 4. I knew that. What I didn't know was that my biological mother was forced to give me up. Margaret, she tried to find me for years. She found out about the wedding through the newspaper. That's how she's here." He watched Sophie closely, bracing himself. But she only took a breath, letting the information settle. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's like a piece of my life just got handed to me without warning, and I don't know what to do with it." Sophie took his hands. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If you want her in our life, then we'll find a way. If you need time, we'll take time." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude that was too large for words. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I want to acknowledge her, not just for me, for her. She came here alone, thinking she'd just watch from the shadows." Sophie nodded. "Then let's bring her into the light." Together, they returned to the reception. Conversations faded into murmurs as Ethan stepped onto the small platform meant for the couple's speech. He cleared his throat and took the microphone. "Sorry to interrupt," he began. "I know today is about joy and celebration, and I'm beyond grateful to have Sophie by my side. But something unexpected happened. Someone unexpected showed up, and I feel that I need to share it." He turned slightly, gesturing to the back of the garden. "That woman sitting alone, her name is Margaret. She's my biological grandmother. And I only learned that today. She came here not to make a scene, not to ask for anything. She came to see me, to see the man her grandson became. And I don't think anyone should ever have to cry alone at a wedding." There was silence at first, then a soft rustle, a collective exhale. A few guests blinked back tears. Sophie stood beside him, her hand on his back, her presence an unspoken affirmation. Margaret didn't move at first, but then someone near her stood up and offered a hand. Another guest followed. Soon, she was walking slowly, hesitantly, toward the front. Ethan stepped down and met her halfway. He offered his arm. She took it. The reception had changed. And no one would ever forget the moment when the celebration became something more. A reunion, a healing, the beginning of something once lost. The garden had returned to a calm murmur after the unexpected announcement, but something fundamental had shifted. The air, once charged with the straightforward joy of a wedding day, now held a deeper kind of reverence, like a room after a long-awaited truth is spoken aloud. Margaret sat at a table near the head of the reception, no longer isolated. A few guests had approached her with quiet kindness, curious but gentle. Some nodded politely. Others simply offered a smile. The floodgates of speculation had opened among the guests, but no one dared to be rude. The gravity of what had transpired was too real to treat as gossip. Sophie, ever poised, returned to the bridal table and resumed light conversations with a few close friends, doing her best to ease the atmosphere while giving Ethan space. Her grace in the moment didn't go unnoticed, and neither did Ethan's quiet focus as he sat beside Margaret, finally asking questions that had waited nearly a lifetime to be voiced. They had taken their seats at a table slightly off to the side, one that allowed them privacy, without fully removing themselves from the event. He leaned in slightly, his hands clasped on the white tablecloth, his voice low. "What was her name?" "My mother." Margaret hesitated. Her eyes grew distant as if reaching through time. Her name was Lily. Lily Jane. She was beautiful, stubborn, and gentle in ways I didn't deserve. When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. My husband, your grandfather, blamed her, said she'd shamed the family. He wouldn't even look at her when she started to show. I tried to protect her, Ethan. I did, but I was complicit too. I stayed silent when I should have screamed. Ethan's throat tightened. The name echoed in his head like an old tune he'd never heard, but somehow recognized. What happened to her? Did she want to keep me? She fought for you. Until the very last moment, Margaret said. Her voice was steady now, but her fingers trembled slightly against the linen. But we were cornered. There were threats of being disowned, of losing everything. We were pressured by his lawyers, his friends. He had influence, money, pride. We were a respectable family in a small town, and scandal wasn't tolerated. When she gave birth, they didn't even let her hold you. They took you from her arms before she could say your name out loud. Ethan's hands curled into fists under the table. Where is she now? Margaret swallowed hard. She left, ran away 3 days later. I never saw her again. He stared at her. You don't know where she went? Margaret shook her head slowly, regret etched into every wrinkle on her face. For years, I tried to find her. She sent a letter once, maybe a year after she disappeared. It came without a return address. Just a few lines. She said she was alive and that she thought about you every day. That was all. The words hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. He sat back in his chair, exhaling hard through his nose. So she could be anywhere. She could be alive. Or not. I have no idea. I hoped, selfishly, that if I found you, I might find her too, Margaret whispered. But I never did, and I'm so sorry. For everything. For a while, neither of them spoke. The party went on around them. Waiters moving with plates of food. Guests laughing softly. Children playing near the fountain. Yet, the table they shared felt suspended from time. Ethan's entire life had operated within a version of the truth that now lay broken in fragments. His birth mother had wanted him. She had tried. And then she vanished. He'd been told nothing of her. And Margaret, this woman who had seemed a stranger just an hour ago, was suddenly the only thread that connected him to a past denied to him from the start. He turned to her again. What was she like? As a person, I mean, before everything. Margaret smiled sadly. She loved books, used to hide in the library for hours. She had this way of listening, really listening, like she saw things he didn't say. And she adored sunflowers, said they looked like they were always searching for something bright. Ethan felt the tears rise before he could stop them. He hadn't cried in years. Not really. Not in that raw, unfiltered way that starts somewhere deep inside and climbs slowly until it breaks past composure. He turned his face slightly, wiping the edge of his eye with a napkin. Margaret reached out and placed a hand gently over his. I never wanted you to grow up not knowing love, she said, her voice almost breaking. And I know you were adopted by a good family. I know you had a life, but I wanted to be there. I wanted to know the boy you were before you became the man you are. I had a good childhood, Ethan admitted. I had parents who gave me everything they could. But I always wondered. Not every day, not always consciously. But there was a part of me that never quite settled. A silence that never explained itself. Margaret nodded slowly. Some silences are inherited, passed down like heirlooms, whether we want them or not. As twilight fell over the estate, the golden sky turning shades of lavender and slate, Ethan knew this day would never be remembered only as his wedding day. It would be remembered as a day he learned his life was not a closed story, but an unfinished one, that his roots, once thought severed, were still alive in the shadows, growing quietly toward the light. He stood at last, helping Margaret to her feet. Come, let's take a walk. They moved away from the tables and into the edges of the property, past hydrangea bushes and ivy-covered walls. The soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet was the only sound between them for a while. Then, after a long pause, Ethan said, If I want to find her, do you think there's any chance I could? Margaret didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was steady. Maybe not with a phone book or an internet search. But sometimes people who are meant to be found will show themselves when you stop chasing and start listening. He nodded, uncertain but moved. The thought lingered as they walked beneath the strings of lanterns lighting the path ahead. Somewhere in the world, a woman named Lily Jane might still be alive. She might be remembering the son she never got to hold. And now, for the first time, Ethan had a reason to hope she could remember him too. They returned to reception just as the first dance began. Sophie waited for him near the center of the garden, her dress glowing under the lights, her smile steady. Ethan reached for her, holding her close as the music played, but his eyes found Margaret once more, seated now beside two of Sophie's aunts, chatting softly, a glass of lemonade in hand. And for the first time that day, Ethan didn't feel divided. He felt whole, not because he had all the answers, but because he had begun to ask the right questions. As the reception carried on into the evening, a peculiar calm settled across the Bellevue estate. The lanterns overhead cast a soft golden glow over the guests who now danced with a slightly more contemplative energy, conversations quieter, eyes more thoughtful. Margaret's presence had become a quiet undercurrent in the celebration, no longer a mystery, but not yet fully understood. Though most guests kept their distance out of respect, the knowledge of who she was added a gravity to the occasion that no one had anticipated. Yet beneath the surface of this calm, a more complex tension stirred within Ethan. He had returned to Sophie's side after the first dance, holding her hand with silent gratitude, but the weight of what he had learned, and what it meant going forward, pressed harder with each passing minute. Sophie sensed it too. She was watching him not with suspicion or fear, but with a kind of perceptiveness he had always admired in her. She didn't need him to say it. She knew something within him had been fundamentally shaken, and that neither of them could move forward pretending otherwise. When the time was right, she leaned into him gently, her voice soft enough for only him to hear. "We should talk. Not later. Now." He nodded without hesitation. They stepped away from the dance floor and made their way into the main house, leaving behind the music and murmurs of the crowd. The parlor was empty, a quiet room untouched by the festivities, with dark mahogany furniture and old oil paintings lining the walls. Sophie closed the door behind them, and they stood in the middle of the room, the silence between them immediate and immense. "I don't need an apology," she said first, her arms crossed loosely. "But I need you to be honest with me about how you're feeling, about what you're thinking." Ethan took a long breath, rubbing the back of his neck before speaking. "I feel like everything I thought I understood about my past got rewritten in a single hour. I'm still trying to process it. My mother might still be out there. Sophie, that's not something I can ignore. I didn't know I wanted that connection, but now I feel like I need it." Sophie watched him for a moment before replying. "I get that. I really do. And if you need time, if you want to go looking for her, I'll support you. But you need to understand what this means for us, too. Today wasn't just about finding pieces of your past. It was about building our future. We've stepped into something permanent, Ethan. And now, everything is happening at once." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to push this day aside. I'm not regretting anything about us. This, us, is what I want. But I can't ignore her. I can't pretend Margaret showing up didn't change something inside me." "I'm not asking you to ignore it," Sophie replied, her voice unwavering. "I just need to know you're still here with me. Fully. Because I didn't marry a man who runs away when things get complicated." Her words were not harsh, but they landed with precision. Ethan stepped closer, closing the space between them. "I'm here. I swear to you, I'm not going anywhere. But I need to make sense of all this, and I need to do it with you by my side, not in spite of you." She reached out and took his hand, holding it tightly. "Then we do this together, you and me. But Ethan, I don't want to wake up tomorrow feeling like I've already lost a part of you to a history I can't touch." "You won't," he said. "This isn't about choosing between then and now. It's about understanding where I came from so I can fully live in what we're building. I've never wanted anything more than this life with you. But I need to make room in that life for the people who were taken from me, and maybe for the ones I haven't even met yet. Sophie exhaled and nodded. Her grip softened, but her eyes remained on his. Then we tell them, the guests, our families, if this is going to be part of our life, it starts today. We don't let Margaret leave this place feeling like she was a footnote in a much larger story. She's part of the narrative now. Ethan looked at her, overwhelmed by her strength. Are you sure? I'm sure. We stand together, remember? Together they walked back outside, rejoining the crowd as dessert was being served. The clatter of forks on plates and the mellow tones of jazz made the moment feel oddly surreal. A few heads turned as Ethan took the microphone again. This time he was calmer, his voice clear and confident as it carried over the garden. I want to thank everyone again for being here. Today was meant to be a celebration of love, of union, and it still is. But something extraordinary happened. You all saw it, and I know there are still questions. So Sophie and I decided we should share more of the story, because today is not about keeping anything hidden. He paused, glancing toward Margaret, who sat quietly at her table, her hands folded in her lap. I was adopted as a child. I didn't know much about my biological family. I never asked. I never thought I needed to. But today, someone came into my life who changed that. Margaret is my grandmother. She has spent decades searching for me. And today, she found me, not in a courtroom or through a DNA test or some grand dramatic gesture, but by sitting quietly at the back of a wedding and letting herself cry. The crowd was silent, the kind of silence that speaks volumes. A few guests shifted in their seats. One or two wiped at their eyes. I want you to know that her presence here means everything to me. And to Sophie, we decided that our story isn't diminished by this. It's expanded. Our family just got bigger, and I'm proud of that. Margaret sat perfectly still, her eyes glossy but wide with disbelief. She didn't seem to know what to do until Sophie approached her and gently extended a hand. We would love for you to sit with us, Sophie said, loud enough for those around her to hear. The moment was not just about inclusion. It was an invitation into something sacred, a merging of past and future, of the fractured and the whole. Margaret took her hand, slowly rising from her seat. The applause began with one person, then two, until it spread across the entire garden, rising like a wave, not out of ceremony, but out of something deeply human, recognition. As she walked to the head table and took a seat beside Sophie and Ethan, the shape of the evening changed once again. Conversations became deeper, laughter more sincere, and even the clinking of glasses seemed to hold meaning. The couple's decision to face the truth, not just as individuals but together, had rippled outward, giving permission for everyone present to acknowledge the quiet complexities of their own lives. Later, as the evening drew to a close and guests began to say their goodbyes, several approached Margaret directly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine warmth. Stories were shared, hands were held, and for the first time in many years, Margaret felt the warmth of belonging. Ethan stood beside Sophie near the garden gate, watching as the final guest departed. The moon was high now, casting a silver sheen across the grass. He turned to her, resting a hand lightly on her waist. "Today wasn't what we planned," he said. "No," she replied. "It was better." And in that quiet, with the lights twinkling above and the night stretching wide around them, they knew they had already begun writing a new chapter, one shaped not only by joy, but by courage, honesty, and the difficult beauty of embracing every thread of the truth. By the time the last guest had left, the Bellevue estate had fallen into a kind of serene quiet. The once bustling garden now stood calm beneath the pale wash of moonlight, the floral arrangements casting elongated shadows across the cobblestone paths. The clinking of glasses and soft music had faded hours ago, replaced by the chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through the oak trees. The newlyweds lingered, not quite ready to let go of the day, as if holding on to the final moments might help them better understand everything that had happened. Margaret was still there, standing near the edge of the patio, her small frame outlined against the night sky. She looked like a figure from another time, her posture both reserved and purposeful. Sophie had gone to fetch her a light cardigan from the house, worried the evening air might be too cool for her. When Sophie returned, she draped it gently over Margaret's shoulders, earning a quiet thank you and a soft, genuine smile. "I hope I didn't cause too much of disruption," Margaret murmured, her voice low but steady. "You didn't," Sophie replied, her tone warm. "You added something this day, didn't even know it needed." Ethan approached then, holding 3 small cups of coffee from the kitchen, steam curling upward into the night. He handed one to Margaret and one to Sophie before taking a seat on the stone bench beside them. For a while, the 3 of them sat together in comfortable silence, sipping slowly, letting the heaviness of the day give way to something quieter, more reflective. Eventually, Ethan spoke. "I don't want a night to be the end of this. Not after everything." Margaret looked at him with a hint of surprise. "You've just had the biggest day of your life, and you want to start a second chapter immediately?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I don't want to wait weeks or months to see you again. I've already lost decades. I don't intend to lose more." Sophie leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful but firm. "Then let's make it happen. We'll visit you soon. We can set aside an afternoon, maybe next weekend, and take things from there." Margaret hesitated. "My home is nothing like this place. It's small and modest. I'm not sure it's the kind of place newlyweds want to spend their time." Ethan smiled faintly. "We're not coming for the place. We're coming for you." The words landed with a weight Margaret couldn't disguise. She pressed a hand to her mouth for a brief moment before lowering it again, her eyes glistening. "Then I'd like that very much." They stayed there longer than any of them had planned, talking in low voices about small things, favorite foods, childhood quirks, the places in Virginia worth visiting in autumn. There was no urgency now, just a slow stitching together of connection that had been left unfinished for too long. By the time they stood, the air had grown cooler, and the moon had climbed higher above the treetops. Margaret declined Sophie's offer to call her a cab, insisting she had driven herself and would be fine getting home. Ethan walked to her car, a well-kept but aging sedan parked at the far end of the gravel driveway. The crunch of their footsteps was the only sound until they reached the vehicle. Before she got in, Margaret turned to him. "I don't expect this to be easy, and I don't want to intrude. You have a new life now, and I've lived mine in a way that doesn't leave much room for grand gestures. But if you let me, I'd like to be part of whatever comes next for you. Quietly, if that's what you prefer." Ethan shook his head. "Not quietly. You're family, Margaret, and I want you in my life, not in the shadows of it." She reached up then, resting her hand lightly against his cheek in a gesture that felt instinctive, almost maternal. "You have your mother's eyes," she said softly, "and I hope one day she gets to see them again." He didn't trust himself to speak without breaking the moment, so he only nodded. She got into the car, started the engine, and gave him a small wave before pulling away down the darkened drive. Ethan stood there a while longer, the gravel cool under his shoes, watching until her taillights disappeared into the night. When he returned to the garden, Sophie was waiting for him, her arms folded loosely, her expression unreadable but calm. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," he replied. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like something missing has started to return. Not all of it, but enough to know it's possible." They gathered the last of their belongings from the bridal suite before leaving the estate. The car ride back to their small apartment was quiet, not in a strained way, but in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had lived through something significant together. The streetlights passed in slow intervals, casting brief flashes of light across their faces. Once home, instead of collapsing from exhaustion, they stayed up, sitting at the kitchen table with the leftover wedding cake between them. Ethan pulled out his phone, not to scroll through messages or social media, but to look up the address Margaret had given him for their visit. He placed the phone face down when he was done, looking across at Sophie. "We're going to see her," he said. Sophie smiled. "I know." And just like that, the wedding day that had begun with simple expectations had ended with something far more complex and meaningful, a doorway opened. Not just a marriage, but to family, history, and the courage to rebuild what time and silence had tried to erase. For Ethan, it felt like the real beginning had only just started, and it was starting with both the woman he had chosen to marry and the woman he had never expected to find.